we're not able to do that as best we think we should be able to do. I mean, Robin can actually provide you a current case in which now we have to redo a process because they made a mistake in one of their controls.
In terms of the controls related to that administration of your office, was that what your predecessor faced as well?
I believe actually that they faced different controls and different issues, and actually probably more severe than what we're experiencing now. But in essence, it still continues. It changes. One of the issues is that it changes from deputy minister to deputy minister, and that should not be the case unless there was a government-wide process or there was a particular issue that we were doing incorrectly. We are subject to the same controls as every other public servant, but where it's inappropriate is where those controls affect our ability to do our job in an independent manner.
When the minister came to this committee, I had asked about those Treasury Board cuts, and Mr. Kelly referenced them as well to Mr. Joshi. Can you confirm as well, Mr. Lick, whether your budget in any way or travel budgets or anything will be experiencing any of these cuts?
They have currently proposed cuts on our on the travel and the contracting side of our budget. They have not been implemented yet because the new fiscal year has not been implemented, and we put forward our issues with it. I don't sit on the committees that look at these particular issues, and rightly so. We are an independent office, but in essence, we're not consulted in the same way that other senior leaders of the department are consulted. And that's problematic. I mean,
because that travel in itself, I mean, that's you going and visiting those complainants and seeing for yourself what is required.
That's correct.
Okay. So that will significantly impact the work that you can do.
I would say at this point the proposed cuts should not significantly cut into it, but we won't know sometimes until we get into it and find out that there are issues that we need to go and see. We need to go to a base to investigate a particular issue. These types of situations appear during the year. So we don't think at this point that the cuts will be problematic, but at the same time, the issue is again a perception of lack of independence, of interference.
Based on your experience, what changes need to be made to the administration of your offices?
Well, I do repeat myself a little bit, but I think legislation and the principles of that legislation that I put forward and just talked about, I think that is one way of doing it. I'm not saying that reporting to Parliament would make it any easier budget-wise, as other independent officers of Parliament experience, but I think the biggest thing that's due to our constituents, the people, the defence community that we represent, is that real independence and perception of independence is absolutely vital. The idea that the department is not interfering in the work that we do, whether it's through a travel cut or a contracting cut, but it's also that perception. But the other part of it I talked about earlier was that idea of confidentiality, that I and my staff in particular need to be protected from not being compelled to stand up in court and testify or in front of administrative process. That is vital to to not only the independence of the office, but also that critical principle of confidentiality for our constituents, so that they feel comfortable and confident to come forward and tell us things that then we can look at.
So speaking to that, I mean, in 2021, I think you published a position paper titled "The Independent Civilian Oversight the Defence Community Deserves No Less." Can you table this paper with the committee today?
Absolutely.
Perfect. And I believe that that's a lot of what you're speaking to today as well. And then in your opening remarks, you talked about your retirement, and I know many of us are very sad to see you go. Has the government begun the process to replace you?
I do feel I have different feelings about leaving too as well. So I will say that just to start off.
Yeah.
I've been looking at the assignment opportunities for my type of positions, GIC opportunities. I have not seen it there. I'm concerned at this point that July is not that far away, and a transparent process to select the best individual to represent the defence community in the work we've done has not started. I do not want to leave the organization in a place without an ombudsman, but there's nothing going. Where is it?
So they haven't, the government hasn't circulated like a job posting or anything like that. So what are the options? So would they just choose from a list of previous applicants, and what are the problems with that?
Well, I think there is no list as any public service selection process goes ahead. You have to say up front that you're going to create a list or a pool of individuals that you may use in the future. But that was 5 years ago, and there was no announcement like that. For me, I think the idea that the selection process that I went through was very transparent. Anybody could apply. I think the same thing should occur going forward. It should not be selecting from a list that was never created before.
Thank you, Ms. Madsen. Before I turn it over to Ms. Gallant, you said something about stop you and your staff from being compelled. So I asked the analyst, what does he mean by that? We don't know. So if you could explain that to us.
Yeah, very, very simply is that, in certain processes like a board of inquiry that the military sometimes carries out, we have been asked to provide information on constituents that we may have investigated or helped with an investigation. We have not provided that information in the past, but I'm not legally protected from having to provide that information. As I said, I will fight it in court if I have to, but that should not be the case. Yes, it might have helped the Board of Inquiry, perhaps, but that principle of confidentiality that we adhere to is so critical for the confidence for people to come forward that I will protect it at no matter what cost.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Ms. Gallant, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. First to Mr. Joshi, can your department provide a response to a file within 45 days?
No, we're not able to do that, no.
Average time would be?
So the average time from receipt to dispatch of a file currently in the last year was about 16 months.
Okay. So missing information had been mentioned. Do you think this is intentional?
No, I don't think it's intentional. So in many cases, for example, it's a two-tiered process where there is a initial authority decision that's made first. After that, if it goes to the final authority, it comes to us. In many cases, the initial authorities do not get a decision out, so we don't get a file at all. We get the grievance with not a lot of background information. So that is one area of cases where we have missing information.
Do you have timely access to members' service numbers if it's not the person who is providing the grievance?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay, so if a grievance involves another member, how much time does it take for you to actually get the other member's service number?
We wouldn't get the service number.
Okay. Have there been any instances of reprisals from D&D or CAF superiors when a service member requested an ATIP?
For us, we wouldn't be we don't have any grievances of that nature. I've not seen grievances of that nature, but I can get back to the committee to take a look at it and see if we've had reprisal types of grievance for ATIPs. Our ATIP system is completely separate.
Okay. Are you aware of any situations where superiors went after members, enacted reprisals against members for bringing forth a grievance?
There are certainly instances where grievers have put in grievances about that subject, that I was aggrieved because I put in a grievance. Now the chain of command is mistreating me. We certainly do see grievances of that nature. They're not that common that we see them, but yes, we do see grievances of that nature.
Well, how should the service members be protected against reprisals?
Well, there are regulations that in place in the Queen's Regulations and Orders, but members should not have to fear reprisal or any bad things happening to them for putting in a grievance. It's their statutory right to do so.
And what are some of the challenges that members in D&D or CAF face when they want to blow the whistle, demonstrate wrongdoing?
I mean, it's certainly just as anybody else, the fear that the chain of command would take negative action against them in some way, shape, or form.
Okay, so very early on, when I got to Parliament, we had Andre Morin as the military ombudsman, and he was very capable and successful, I should say, in uncovering and getting to the bottom of the soldiers being exposed to different chemicals and getting compensation for that. So he seemed to be able to cut through at that time. Are there laws or regulations that have changed since then to make your job even more difficult to get to the bottom of a situation, to get the information you need?
I would say that, so when we're talking about, and as I said in my opening remarks, when we're talking about individual investigations, people come forward with a complaint or something, we are very, very, very successful in getting resolution for them. As I said, I think I might have mentioned our statistic is we're 100% successful at this point in getting resolution for them where we see unfairness in a process. What I'm concerned with more than anything is the ability to have responses on our systemic investigations, but probably more importantly, to have action on our systemic investigations more than anything. And that can involve any sorts of circumstances, different constituents, whatever it might be. That is probably where my biggest concern is at this point in time.
Were there any instances where D&D or CAF tried to interfere with your duties as an ombudsman, specifically in regards to complaints to D&D or CAF superiors from some subordinates?
I would say at this point, in my experience, and perhaps Robin can supplement with her previous experience, I have not seen anything at this point that would suggest that there's been anything inappropriate in terms of interference on an individual complaint. Sometimes it takes us a little bit of time to get some information. Sometimes it might be classified. But we generally find the CAF actually very cooperative when we ask for information. I always say that when we call, when the investigators call, the people on the other end of the phone line sit up straighter. It's just an idea that they actually do respond actually pretty well.
Mr. Collins, 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and welcome to our witnesses. Mr. Joshi, can I ask you in terms of the many of the questions at our meeting today and past meetings centered around, the number of grievances and then the process a grievance takes after it's been filed by a CAF member. I'm interested in the conflict resolution process that you have in place prior to someone filing a formal grievance, and how that process might help us reduce the number of grievances that we have. And so could you relay to the committee in terms of what process is in place to a member who has an inquiry about a personal matter that they have and they're contemplating filing a grievance?
So we are not, a grievance, we only see a grievance when it's referred to us by the Canadian Forces, which is long after the grievance has been filed. Usually it's going to be 4 to 6 months at least after it's filed. What we do keep on our website, we publish case summaries, and those, if an individual calls us, we could direct them to our website with case summaries so they could have an idea of what types of findings and recommendations have been provided in the past. When final decisions are made by the Chief of Defence Staff, we also summarize those and add them into our case summary batch so that a griever could see, in essence, how the Canadian Forces may have looked at it. But in terms of us engaging in conflict resolution early on in the process, that is not part of our mandate.
So they would then turn to the complaint management service that's offered? Is that?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes.
I know that in dealing with, there are a lot of similarities with the collective bargaining process and unions as it relates to their rights that they have. And of course, our system here is managed differently under the Act. The question that I have is in terms of, I found over the years in terms of dealing with employee grievances that oftentimes it's a leadership issue. It is one where I could look back in the career that I had prior to this one, I could look back at individuals who, wherever they went in the organization, we'd see a bump in the number of grievances. And that just seemed to be a trend that followed with them. And I think a lot of that had to do with leadership skills and interpersonal skills and how they dealt with, in this instance, employees. Can I ask you, Mr. Lick, in terms of how much of it is an issue related to culture and leadership as it relates to the ballooning number of grievances that we've seen? Conversely, then, how much is it related to the cultural change that we want to see within the organization?
I think there are